To orchestrate my divorce, my 14-year-old daughter devised a plan to make it appear as though I was involved with my male assistant. In the hotel suite, she looked at me with a detached expression. Aunt Clara mentioned that if you and father separate, she could become my new mother. I responded that I no longer wanted her as my mother, expressing a preference for Aunt Clara instead. My husband Michael spoke coldly. Sophie, you've truly disappointed me. Clara is indeed more capable of raising Lily than you are. Feeling utterly dejected, I returned home to pack all my belongings, leaving behind only a divorce contract and a letter terminating our mother-daughter bond. 3 days after being assaulted by my assistant's girlfriend and her accomplices and being admitted to the hospital, I lay silently, staring vacantly at the pale ceiling. The needle marks on my arm still throbbed faintly, and the 14-year mother-daughter relationship I had cherished was now shattered by a conspiracy. 3 days prior, I had received a message from my husband, Michael. Shanghai International Hotel, waiting for you? I thought my inattentive husband had finally realized and remembered my birthday. I never imagined that upon knocking on the hotel room door, I would be knocked unconscious, only to awaken wrapped in a thin towel. The man holding me was not Michael, but my male assistant. Before I could comprehend what had transpired, the hotel door was forcefully opened. The assistant's girlfriend, along with 2 other women, stormed in and began assaulting me. Then my husband and daughter arrived. My daughter Sophie took cover behind Michael. Staring at me with coldness, Aunt Clara said, "If you and Dad divorce, I can be my new mom." "I don't want you to be my mom anymore. I prefer Aunt Clara." Michael replied coldly, "Sophie, you've really let me down. Clara is indeed more suitable for educating Lily than you are." Before I could defend myself, Michael stormed out, taking our daughter with him. In the hospital, I glanced at the patient lying in the adjacent bed, who appeared very happy. From her hospitalization until her recovery, her entire family was busy caring for her. However, during the 3 days I was hospitalized, Michael and Sophie visited only once. Before I could shed any tears, a message arrived on my phone. It was a video from Clara, set in a high-end cafe near the university. Clara was wearing elaborate makeup. The man beside her, bowing his head to cut the cake for her, was my husband Michael, whom I had been married to for 20 years. In our 2 decades of marriage, he had never shown such tender care towards me. The only time he had cut cake for me was on my birthday, when I had sprained my wrist. He had simply called the waiter instead. What did he say that day? "Emily, is it appropriate for someone of my status to cut the cake for you? You're already a mother. Why are you being so dramatic?" Oh, so as his wife, I was overreacting. But when it came to cutting cake for his mistress Clara, he was more than willing. All his excuses were just because I wasn't worthy. The video continued with Clara picking up a piece of fruit with a fork and feeding it to Sophie. "Sophie, be a good girl. Eating fruit will give you fair skin." Fruit salad was Sophie's least favorite. In the past, when I accidentally placed a small apple slice on her plate, she would throw a tantrum. She would smash the plate and spill the food all over me, crying desperately. Eventually, I had to promise her I would never make fruit salad again to regain her willingness to talk. But now, she happily devoured the fruit salad Clara offered, taking large bites. Bite after bite, she finished the entire plate. She looked at Clara with eyes full of dependence and happiness. "I like Aunt Clara best in the whole world." Clara smiled gracefully and provocatively asked, "Then don't you like your mom?" Hearing this, Sophie immediately showed a look of disgust. "I hate my mom the most. She just forces me to study. It's so boring." The daughter I had painstakingly raised was now openly insulting me in front of others, and her father, Michael, stood silently by her side. I finally realized that I had been greedy, foolishly hoping to receive love from such a father and daughter. I decided to sever ties. From now on, I no longer wanted such cold-hearted family members. Upon discharge from the hospital, I returned home early and made myself a bowl of noodles in the kitchen. Unexpectedly, Clara arrived with them. At the sight of me, my daughter Sophie wrinkled her nose in disgust, saying, "The smell of cooking oil on you is repulsive." The kitchen stove had been on constantly. She was likely doing this to tease Clara. Sure enough, her exaggerated reaction made Clara cover her mouth and chuckle. Sophie looked at me with a mix of smugness and provocation as I put the dishes and chopsticks in the dishwasher, ignored her, and headed to the bedroom. But Michael quickly chased after me, looking at me with disdain. How dare you come back? I calmly turned around. This is my home. Why can't I return? Michael looked at me with disgust. You let your daughter see her own mother lying in bed with another man. How dare you still show your face in front of her? I stared back at him. That day was a misunderstanding. Nothing happened between me and the male assistant. I went to the hotel because you sent me a message. Michael's face turned pale. I threw his phone at you. That day, Sophie was using my phone for online language classes all day. How could I have sent you a message? I tilted my head and met my daughter's gaze. I noticed that from an angle Michael couldn't see, Sophie gave me a sly smile. Sure enough, on Michael's phone, I couldn't find that message. Moreover, the message on my phone was also gone. I grabbed my daughter's shoulders with both hands and asked, Sophie, was it you who did this during my hospitalization? Only you touched my phone. Ugly old hag, don't get that wrinkled face of yours close to me. You're not my mom. Aunt Clara is my mom. You don't deserve my dad at all, let alone being my mother. From now on, Aunt Clara will be my mom. The old witch is pinching my shoulders so hard. Aunt Clara, save me. Clara pulled Sophie over and shielded her behind. Sister Emily, don't be so harsh to the child. I gave her a glare. Seeing this, Michael actually protected them both and stood in front of me. Clara deliberately set aside her work to come home and spend time with Sophie today. It's okay if you don't show gratitude, but why are you making this ugly face? Go to the hospital for a checkup quickly. There are still children at home. If you bring back some disease, I'll never forgive you. I stood at the door with a cold expression. Well, I'm shameless while she's virtuous. Let's get divorced. You three can be together from now on. My voice was soft, but carried a hint of disdain, which flashed in Michael's eyes. Emily, where did you learn this bad habit? Threatening with divorce at the slightest provocation? Do you think you can threaten me? Clara also stood up, speaking in a seemingly gentle tone to persuade me, but actually inciting me. Emily, don't get me wrong. Michael and I are just college classmates. I can see that Michael is a good husband who is responsible for his family. You two have a lovely daughter. You should cherish it. How can you mention divorce so casually? Sure enough, the green tea bitch lines are all quite similar. Besides, Sophie already told me. It was you who had an affair with the male assistant first. If anyone should mention divorce, it should be Michael to you. Sure enough, with her reminder. Michael's disgust towards me deepened. I nodded indifferently. You're right. So I'm giving you this stinky shoe of his. After saying that, I turned and walked into the bedroom, ignoring the secretly gleeful Clara and the gloomy Michael behind me. Sophie shouted at my back, Dad, divorce Mom quickly, she's so dirty. I turned my head and glanced at Sophie, who guiltily backed away behind Clara. At this moment, I realized that the daughter I had raised for 14 years was an ungrateful brat whom I had invested so much in all these years. I packed all my things in the bedroom into a suitcase. I placed the signed divorce agreement and the letter terminating the mother-daughter relationship on the desk, and finally removed the wedding ring from my finger and didn't follow Michael into the room. From the adjacent study, sounds of heavy objects hitting the wall could be heard from time to time. Sure enough, Clara's plan had succeeded. Because shortly after that, I heard affectionate conversations between two people coming from the adjacent study. I felt as if I had fallen off a cliff, and many past events flashed through my mind. Michael wasn't good at housework, but whenever Clara came over, he would patiently learn how to make pour-over coffee for her. As for me, in our 20-year marriage, he had only made tea for me once, using low-quality tea from the public tea room. Under Michael's influence, our 14-year-old daughter also grew closer to Clara. She went to beauty salons with her all day, getting facials, leg treatments, fake nails, ear piercings, and tattoos. She was a typical spoiled girl. Now, she actually helped her stepmother design a trap to frame me for having an affair. This was something I never expected. I opened my phone. On WeChat Moments, Clara posted a photo of delicate snacks on the desk and the back view of Michael grading her thesis. She captioned it, "There will always be someone in the world who will always be by your side when you're most down." Just 1 minute after the photo was posted, my mother-in-law and sister-in-law couldn't wait to like it. My mother-in-law even commented, "Clara is so learned, unlike some people who have been married into the family for 20 years and are still so ignorant." My sister-in-law also chimed in. I'm a straightforward person, so I'll just say it. Please, Sister Clara, take my brother. My brother's current wife has such low education. I knew they were nitpicking and mocking my graduate degree, but I still casually liked it. However, when I refreshed again, that WeChat Moments post was gone. And I didn't bother to care anymore and walked out of the bedroom with my suitcase. Seeing me carrying the suitcase, Michael snapped coldly, Clara's WeChat Moments post was just a joke. Do you have to make such a big deal out of it? Clara also had red eyes and apologized insincerely. Emily, I didn't know you would really mind. If I had known, I wouldn't have come over to make you angry today. I looked at Michael calmly and said in a cold tone, I've left the divorce agreement on the desk. See you at the Civil Affairs Bureau tomorrow morning. During the conversation, a reserved online car hailing vehicle arrived. I turned around and left. Michael was about to say something, but daughter Sophie blocked in front of him, letting her go. She threw a book at me. It was the review materials for the high school entrance examination that I had stayed up a whole week to make for you. Get out quickly. Aunt Clara will be my new mom from now on. Okay? I opened the car door and got in. Let's go, driver. The vehicle drove away, leaving the father and daughter far behind. In the car, looking at the scenery receding outside the window, I recalled my relationship with Michael. Back then, to successfully complete my graduate studies, I worked part-time while studying. I was a tutor for Michael's elderly father. I tutored Michael's father in ancient Chinese studies. The old man was an ancient book enthusiast and also a renowned literary professor. Because we had similar interests, I got along very well with the old man. He even wanted to recommend me to his alma mater for a doctoral degree and promised to help me apply for a full scholarship. At that time, Michael had just been rejected by Clara and was muddling through his days, buried in his research. I had no interaction with him initially because he rarely came home. Only on holidays would he visit his father. Even though we were from the same university, he had never known me. Until Clara went abroad for further studies, he immersed himself in academics and couldn't extricate himself. Due to late-night discussions, I became pregnant with our daughter. After that day, Michael was almost driven out of the house by the old man. My marriage to Michael was arranged by the old man before he passed away. No matter how much Michael's mother resisted, it was futile. Actually, the moment I learned I was going to marry Michael, I was secretly pleased because I had harbored a crush on this erudite professor since entering graduate school. However, after marriage, Michael and I were both busy with our own lives, and our weekly communication felt like fulfilling a task. Only after an academic discussion related to Clara would Michael excitedly burst into my study to share with me. Our relationship briefly revived just before Clara returned to teach in our country, but to my surprise, everything changed after her return. At the welcome party, she tearfully said she had been headstrong and missed her best academic partner. And now that she had come to her senses, she had to collaborate again. So she returned to our university, and upon hearing the news, Michael, even disregarding the appointment to discuss a thesis with me, rushed straight to the school. After Clara returned, she gradually took over my marriage and family until Michael and our daughter both became her most loyal followers. The vehicle stopped steadily downstairs at the staff dormitory of the City Museum. I got out of the car with my luggage and entered the single apartment the curator had always reserved for me. Before I could finish unpacking, I received a call from the curator. Emily, we've received a task from above. A collection of precious ancient books has been discovered in Xi'an and needs urgent restoration. The high-speed rail ticket for tomorrow has been booked for you. Hurry up and pack your luggage and set off. Don't worry, this task is urgent. When you come back, I'll accompany you to explain to your Michael. No need, curator. I'm planning to get divorced and focus on the ancient book restoration work from now on. I replied softly. Michael didn't like it at all that I was wholeheartedly devoted to ancient book restoration. He thought it was boring and said it would prevent me from properly taking care of our daughter. I used to care about him and our daughter, so whenever the curator arranged work-related trips, I would always decline if possible. Now, I finally realized that the only things that wouldn't betray me were those seemingly ancient books in the museum. Hearing what I said, although the curator's tone had a hint of regret, he was ultimately relieved. Oh, Emily, it's good you've come to your senses. You're excellent. To be honest, we all think Michael doesn't deserve you. A warm current flowed through my heart. The curator had treated me like his own daughter all these years. I smiled with relief. Well, I think so too. That night was the most peaceful I'd had in recent years. I didn't have to prepare coffee for Michael, who was working overtime, nor did I have to make a midnight snack for Sophie, who was staying up late to finish a thesis. I slept soundly until dawn. I simply washed up and dragged my luggage directly to the entrance of the Civil Affairs Bureau. But after waiting for 3 hours, Michael still didn't show up. I sent him over a dozen messages, but he didn't reply. As the departure time of the high-speed rail approached, I had to leave first. After going through the ticket-checking procedures and before turning off my phone, a piece of academic news popped up on the news interface. Renowned Professor Michael announced that he would co-host a major research project with Dr. Clara. College classmates are really an invincible existence. Is Michael going to personally promote Clara now? I couldn't help but sneer, exit the news interface, and turn off my phone. Looking at the scenery speeding by outside the train window, I remained calm. No matter what they do in the future, it has nothing to do with me. Putting on my headphones, I immersed myself in professional audio about ancient book restoration until a violent jolt woke me up. The passengers around me were all in a panic. I didn't have time to think about what had happened. The high-speed rail made an emergency stop, and my head hit the seat in front of me without warning. In the university office, Michael had just finished a discussion meeting about the research project with Clara when he noticed over a dozen unread messages from Emily on his phone. A colleague joked, "Mrs. Michael still cares about you as always. It's really enviable." Michael, however, sneered, "She's begging for forgiveness. I still have to keep her at arm's length so she knows not to interfere with my work casually." But he was interrupted by an unknown call. "Hello, is this Mr. Michael, the husband of Miss Emily?" At 11 o'clock this morning, the high-speed rail that Miss Emily was on unfortunately derailed due to a malfunction. 3 years later, Mom! A loud voice rang out in the yard. I put down the ancient book in my hand and walked out of the study with a smile as a little boy covered in dirt rushed into my arms like a cannonball. I casually picked up a wet wipe to wipe his face. After a few wipes, the white wet wipe was smeared gray, and the little boy's fair and clean face was revealed. He was Noah, an orphan I adopted 3 years ago after moving to Xi'an. "Little muddy monkey, did you go digging in the dirt again?" The little boy showed his front teeth. "I caught a cricket." He sounded quite proud. "Do you still remember the seal characters I taught you yesterday?" "Mom, I'm hungry." Noah stuck out his tongue, his big eyes rolling as he started to change the topic. "I helped the curator sort out a big box of ancient books this morning. You must be so tired." I rubbed his soft hair and looked at the smart little boy with satisfaction, feeling warmth in my heart. "There are wontons and steamed eggs left for you on the table. After eating, wash the bowls clean. Mom has to go to work." The little boy's eyes lit up immediately, and he said excitedly, "Don't worry, Mom." He ran with his heels clicking together and rushed into the kitchen to start eating. And I then changed into my work clothes and walked towards the museum with my restoration tools. In these 3 years, more and more precious ancient books had been discovered, and my restoration skills had become more proficient. But I had only been working for a while when the curator hurried over to me. "Emily, you'd better go home quickly. Someone saw your Noah being bullied at the entrance of the museum." I was so worried that I rushed towards the entrance immediately, but at the entrance I saw Michael and Sophie, whom I hadn't seen for 3 years, as well as Noah, who had been pushed down by Sophie. "Emily!" Seeing me appear, Michael walked towards me eagerly. Compared to 3 years ago, he looked much more haggard and aged. I pushed him away forcefully and strode over to Sophie, who was looking at me with teary and excited eyes. I grabbed her arm and flung it aside. Sophie staggered from the push and, covering her arm, said with teary eyes, "Mom, I'm Sophie. Why did you push me?" I picked up Noah and held him in my arms, gently soothing him. Hearing her words, I snorted coldly. "I'm not your mom. Don't forget that I've already severed the mother-daughter relationship with you. Your beloved Aunt Clara is your new mom now." Sophie's lips trembled, and her face suddenly turned pale. "I don't accept her as my new mom. That's none of my business. I have nothing to do with you and your father anymore. Please don't bother me, Dad." I turned around with Noah in my arms and was blocked by Michael, who had a dark expression. "Are you married?" Sophie, even angrier, pointed at Noah and demanded, "He says he's your son. How is that possible? I don't have a younger brother." "Noah is a child I adopted, and I'm not married either," I said calmly. Hearing this, The expressions on Michael and Sophie's faces became expectant, but don't you forget that I used to have a happy family, but you destroyed it with your own hands. I almost roared out these words, and Sophie and Michael's faces instantly turned ashen. I'm sorry, Michael said in a hoarse voice. Can we start over? Come back with me, okay, Emily? Sophie also grabbed the corner of my clothes. The once proud and conceited young lady was now crying so hard that her makeup was all smeared. Please don't abandon me, okay? Mom, I miss you so much. I don't want any other woman to be my mom. I only want you. Sophie was crying so hard that she could hardly catch her breath, as if she was about to pass out in the next second. Even Noah was affected, and his eyes turned red. The little boy choked back his sobs and pleaded with me, Mom, I don't care about the fact that sister pushed me. Please don't make her cry anymore. I lovingly rubbed his head and explained softly, she was the child I had before. She broke my heart, so I don't want her anymore. These words were like a final verdict. Sophie's crying stopped abruptly, as if her throat was choked. She looked at me with swollen and red eyes, full of horror and despair, not even daring to cry anymore. I carried Noah back to the office. Michael was unwilling to leave but didn't dare to get too close to me, so he could only pull Sophie and follow from a distance. I didn't care about them. I carried Noah back to the office to treat his wounds. Sophie was over 10 years older than him, and she didn't control her strength well. Noah had scrapes on his knees and elbows. I patiently coaxed him and finally finished applying the medicine. When I looked back, I found Sophie looking at me with teary eyes. Mom, my hand is also scratched. I looked at the tiny scratches on her slender fingers and remained unmoved. I am the past. I loved her to the core. It wasn't just a scratch. Even if she just frowned casually, it was enough to keep me awake all night worrying about her if Mom had work to do this afternoon. Be good in the office by yourself or the wound will get infected. I gently instructed Noah. He opened his big, black eyes and looked timidly at Michael and Sophie behind me, and then at me. He asked anxiously, Mom, are you going to leave? I knew he was afraid I would leave. The day I met Noah, it was a rainy day. The 6-year-old little boy was wearing a school uniform full of stains, huddled at the entrance of the museum. His exposed calves were thin and white, and his short hair was messy and covered with mud. The curator said he was from the nearby orphanage. His parents had died in a car accident, and none of his relatives were willing to take him in. He had been wandering for several days before he met me. Looking at the pitiful little boy in front of me, I thought of my lost family. So I adopted him and named him Noah, hoping his future would be as sweet as sugar. Noah was smart and sensible. I didn't want to hide things from him. So in the following days, I gradually told him about my past marriage and that I had a daughter. At that time, Noah didn't make a fuss. He just silently leaned his small body against me and asked softly, Mom, are you sad? He was asking about me lying in the hospital bed, whether I was sad or not. I sighed, swallowed the tears in my eyes, and said softly, very sad. Hearing this, Noah stretched out his small hand and gently patted my back, as if he had made some kind of determination. From now on, Noah would love Mom well. Mom, don't be sad anymore. From that day on, I had a son in my life and no longer had a husband or a daughter. The memory was interrupted by Sophie, who was slowly approaching. She had grown much taller and looked more and more like Michael. She would become a beauty who could charm boys in the future. Mom, could you please repair this for me? Sophie opened her hand, and what she was holding was, surprisingly, the book she had thrown at me on the day I left. I stared at the book in a daze, but Noah was quicker than me. He pushed Sophie's hand away and said seriously, there are so many words densely written by Mom on this, but such a precious thing was broken by you. Now you still have the nerve to ask Mom to repair it again. Me? I didn't do it on purpose. Sophie blushed with shame, lowered her head deeply, and didn't dare to look at me again. Michael seemed to finally remember the process of me making the high school entrance examination review material for Sophie. At that time, he was still thinking about Clara all the time and always had to go abroad to attend academic conferences. Sophie was very unhappy and, at such a young age, deliberately skipped classes and missed exams, trying to get Michael's attention this way. I couldn't get in touch with Michael, and the teacher said Sophie needed parental care. I was extremely worried and stayed with Michael, and the teacher said Sophie needed parental care. I was extremely worried and stayed with Sophie all day long. To help her improve her grades, I even stayed up for a week to make this high school entrance examination review material for her. And the day she threw this book at me was the day our mother-daughter relationship was broken. Mr. Michael, please don't disturb me and my son. I gave the two people in front of me to leave. If you don't want me to hate you, you can stay. As soon as these words came out, Michael's face instantly became a bit ugly and rigid. For him, being willing to lower himself to come to me was already giving me a way out, Emily. I didn't sign the divorce agreement. I'm still your husband, Michael said in a hoarse voice. And Sophie is your only daughter. If you can't be so headstrong, I glanced at him with amusement and shoved my open phone in front of his eyes. Michael, your good partner Clara has committed academic fraud. Why don't you hurry back and have a look? However, Michael calmly closed the phone and said with a helpless tone, I know. It was I who reported it. I was stunned, but I quickly realized it was just nonsense. Could Michael be willing to report his mistress and first love whom he adored so much? I'd rather believe that the sun rises from the west. And the appearance of Michael and his daughter was just a small episode in my peaceful life. I didn't take it seriously at first, but unexpectedly, Michael actually rented a house near the museum and simply settled down there. If Sophie, the young lady who had been spoiled since childhood, actually learned from Noah and tried to please me, Noah would get up early to sort out ancient books and prepare a cup of coffee for me to take to work before going out. Sophie would carefully make a pot of tea. The tea leaves were my favorite longjing. She would hold the teapot and wait outside my office door, looking eagerly through the glass door, afraid of missing me. Then she would be surrounded and watched by Noah and the interns, feeling extremely embarrassed. Sophie was very shy. Noah said to her triumphantly, "Don't compete with me for mom." Sophie was so embarrassed she could die, but still, she was stubborn. "She's my mom too. I was born by her," Noah retorted. "Then why would mom rather have me, the adopted one, than you? You'd better reflect on it." Sophie was left with tears in her eyes but could do nothing about it. While Sophie and Noah were bickering with each other, Michael was wholeheartedly focused on me, seeming to think that as long as he lowered himself and courted me properly, I would forgive him and get back together with him. So, when I returned to the office, what I saw was the comical scene of Michael wearing gloves and restoring an ancient book. There was a pile of already restored ancient books on the table. Seeing me enter, Michael showed a flattering smile. "Emily, you're back? Come and see how I've restored this." I looked at him calmly and suddenly smiled. "Michael, have you forgiven me?" But Noah glared at him and said angrily, "Mom is allergic to acidic paper, so she can't touch the ones you're restoring. And she's best at restoring silk manuscripts, so she's not interested in those paper, ancient books you've restored at all. You see, even a little boy who has only been with me for 3 years can clearly know my specialty. But Michael, my husband who keeps saying he loves me, doesn't understand at all. I used to often do these restorations before." Michael stood there like a student who had made a mistake, dumbfounded. I said softly, "Because it was required by the work. Because it was work, I didn't care. But now, I live only for my own interests." Back in the lounge, I changed back into my work clothes and planned to continue restoring the ancient book at hand. The next second, the door was pushed open. Sophie walked in carefully, holding an ancient book in her hands. She had grown a lot taller and looked like a younger version of me between her eyebrows and eyes. "Mom, this ancient book was found by Dad and me together. After all, she was still a child." I didn't want to argue with her either. I took the ancient book and put it aside. Sophie didn't leave. She looked eagerly at the notebook I made for Noah on the bookshelf. There were cartoon avatars of me and him drawn on it, looking like a real mother and son. Suddenly, Sophie started to cry, silently, but the tears just couldn't stop flowing. I was a bit surprised. Combining with Michael's words, it was I who reported it. A bad thought came to mind. After I left, "Was Clara not nice to you?" Sophie nodded and then shook her head. I handed her a tissue. She then told the truth. She was only nice to me when there were people around. Behind my back, she would belittle me and even deliberately smear me. I stood still. Sophie reached out her hand, trying to hold mine, but I avoided it. She looked at me and said, "Mom, it was Aunt Clara who instigated me to frame you for having an affair back then. She told me that if you and Dad got divorced, she would give me a sum of money to let me travel around the world. I was in my rebellious phase at that time. I liked to compare myself with other classmates at school. I was momentarily bewitched by her, that's why. I'm sorry, I misunderstood you back then. I only found out later that you didn't betray me at all." Michael walked in at some point. He said with a guilty tone, "I thought she was still the same as in her student days, but I didn't expect that she'd committed a lot of academic misconduct these years abroad. She even instigated our daughter to design a trap to frame you for having an affair. Later, in order to cooperate with me, she tampered with my research data. How could I have hurt you for such a woman back then?" Enough," I interrupted him. "The fact that you hurt me has already happened. The reason you're saying this now is only because you found out that Clara isn't as good as you thought. What if she was a good scholar? Would you still apologize for hurting me? Would you still feel guilty?" Michael was stunned. I shook my head with a smile. "You wouldn't. Not only would you not, but you'd also think that divorcing me was quite the correct thing to do, because you've never really respected me from the beginning to the end." After that day, Michael quieted down a lot. Not only was he feeling guilty towards me, but also because their research project had been constantly questioned by the academic community due to Clara's academic misconduct, that I had been avoiding paying attention to the academic circle these years. I only found out recently that the paper with Clara, as the first author, was exposed to have faked academic achievements before it was officially published. Her research results were just a big patchwork. She plagiarized no less than 20 original papers of foreign scholars. Originally, Michael had suppressed the news and didn't make it public. It wasn't until, for some reason, Michael suddenly severed ties with Clara publicly 2 years ago. Only then did the academic community expose this matter again. Clara, who was once an academic rising star, has now become an academic fraudster despised by the whole industry. But all of this has nothing to do with me. In the past 3 years, the ancient book restoration work in our museum was coming to an end. As long as we ensure the successful restoration of all ancient books, my work in the museum would come to a close. In the future, I could take Noah back to the big city and let him receive a better education. Thinking of this, my mood had been much better every day. It was my turn to work the night shift on this day. The ancient book restoration room in the museum was underground and relatively enclosed. It was always silent all around at night. Even though I had been working there for 3 years, I still got a bit nervous every time I worked the night shift. Noah would always bring his toy robot to accompany me. I would play science popularization videos for him on the tablet while continuing to restore ancient books with a magnifying glass. In the latter half of the night, Noah fell into a deep sleep, hugging the robot. However, I heard unusual footsteps outside the restoration room. Noah's robot suddenly lit up with a red light and sounded an alarm. Because of the preciousness of ancient books, there would be lawbreakers eyeing us. Sure enough, before I could press the alarm button, the door of the restoration room was suddenly pried open. The whole basement was plunged into darkness. The incident happened instantly when I pressed the alarm button. The safe behind me was full of precious ancient books that had already been restored. Once they fell into the hands of thieves, the consequences would be unimaginable. But there was also Noah beside me. I couldn't let him get hurt. To prevent the thieves from discovering us, I held the tweezers for restoration in my hand, hugged Noah, and carefully moved towards the emergency exit. But we still made some noise when going upstairs. There were 3 thieves in total, all young people wearing masks. They ran towards us. I was so scared that I picked up Noah and rushed out. But obviously, I couldn't outrun them. However, just when I was about to be caught, Michael burst in through the door with security guards who arrived in time. But nobody expected those thieves had brought electric shock batons. The moment the sound of electric shocks rang out, Michael lunged towards me, but I subconsciously pushed him away and tightly protected Noah in my arms. Finally, all the thieves were captured, and Michael was sent to the hospital in time. He was injured by the electric shock because I pushed him away. I took Noah in the car to visit him, who had already been discharged from the emergency room in the university-affiliated hospital. His arm was bandaged. When he saw me, his eyes lit up for a moment and then quickly dimmed. I placed a book on the bedside table and comforted him. Sophie had been picked up by her grandmother. School was about to start. Michael nodded. I glanced at Noah, who was obediently waiting at the door, thought it over carefully, and then continued. In the future, I will take Noah and leave here to send him to school in the big city. I don't want him to have any connection with the Michael family. Let's get divorced when you recover. Michael found it hard to accept, and his eyes immediately turned red. Suddenly, I couldn't quite remember what the Michael who used to be so absorbed in research for Clara looked like in the past. His tone was humble yet resigned as he said, "So there's really no chance for us two anymore?" After a moment of silence, I nodded. Michael, like a convicted criminal who had just received a verdict, suddenly closed his eyes, and his chest heaved uncontrollably as he sobbed once. He was crying. Tears slid down his haggard cheeks. He choked back his sobs and apologized. I never thought about getting divorced from you, Emily. I stopped caring about Clara long ago, but I had cooperated with her for 10 years. I couldn't accept the fact that she betrayed me. That's why I kept subconsciously choosing her, but I never thought about hurting you because of her. I punished Sophie privately for framing you. During the days you were in the hospital, I canceled all of her credit cards. It was precisely because of this that she deliberately opposed you. During the days you were in the hospital, I canceled all of her credit cards. It was precisely because of this that she deliberately opposed you. It was my fault. He was delivering an apology that was 3 years late, but I didn't need it anymore. On the day I heard about your high-speed rail accident, I was extremely scared. I never thought about losing you. Fortunately, it took me 3 years to finally find out about you, but I didn't expect that you would really never want me and our daughter again. In the end, Michael couldn't control himself anymore and burst into loud sobs. I stood up helplessly and in the midst of his heartbroken crying, walked towards Noah, who was looking over here curiously. I crouched down and asked him, "Come on, Noah. Mom Emily will take you to see the newly arrived ancient books." Noah excitedly held my hand and hopped away. Half a month later, Michael was discharged from the hospital. He came to the city where Noah and I worked and went through the divorce agreement with me. Besides giving me a house and a car, he also transferred a generous research fund to me. I accepted it all. After all, raising a child requires sufficient resources. In the future, I will cultivate Noah into an independent and confident person, not like I used to be being timid in the academic circle. In my eyes, Emily was always taciturn. Just like her work, it was extremely boring and couldn't be compared with Clara at all. But for some reason, every time I came home and saw her, my restless heart would always be soothed. So I started to work at home on purpose, just to be able to see Emily and then strike up a conversation with her on the pretext of discussing academic issues. Looking at her focused side profile, I found it very attractive. That late-night discussion was an accident. I didn't intend to have a relationship with Emily. But when my father asked me to marry Emily afterwards, I was unexpectedly relieved and even had some anticipation and joy. Life after marriage was as calm as ever. She was always wholeheartedly devoted to her ancient book restoration work. This made me very dissatisfied. So I deliberately said that her work was too boring and used our daughter as an excuse to ask her to focus more on the family. Actually, I also said that her work was too boring and used our daughter as an excuse to ask her to focus more on the family. Actually, I also knew that these were all the accusations I forced upon Emily. She was a very responsible mother. But my daughter was very much like me, both being spoiled people, willful and arrogant because of our talents. Since Clara returned to the country, Emily had started to act strangely. She was always alone in the study, staring blankly, or she would get angry and be in low spirits because I had discussed academics with Clara. I was also very annoyed. I thought she didn't know how to cherish her position a bit, but I was also secretly proud. Did it mean that she cared about me a lot? So I deliberately discussed academics with Clara and even wrote a recommendation letter for her. Anyway, most of those recommendation words were just templates. But as long as she got jealous, I would double my care for her after just doing this once. But I never expected that she would have an affair with her male assistant and even abandon our daughter. After seeing the divorce agreement, I was furious. I even agreed to Clara's proposal of jointly applying for a major research project in a fit of anger. Only I knew that I was a bit panicked. This panic grew stronger and stronger after she ignored me for the whole night. until I received the phone call notifying that the high-speed rail she was on had derailed. I completely broke down. Fortunately, it was just a misunderstanding. The high-speed rail did derail, but her name was not on the casualty list. However, I could no longer get in touch with her. Even Emily's curator refused to tell me about her whereabouts. My daughter also gradually realized the fact that her mother had disappeared. She started to cry, shouting for mom all night long. And she told me the truth about Emily's affair with the male assistant. Looking at my daughter's crying face, I suddenly felt extremely disgusted. It was all her fault. It was also my own fault. Finally, after searching hard for 3 years, I finally saw her in a news report about ancient book restoration. I eagerly took the high-speed rail, taking my equally eager daughter with me to find her. However, 3 years had passed. Emily had actually adopted another child. She didn't want our daughter, nor did she want me anymore. No matter how hard I tried, she was always cold towards me. I finally understood. All of this was my own doing. I deserved it. From now on, I would lose the person I loved most forever.